Welcome to this free sales training lesson. This is a shortened version of our lessons on how to overcome buyer roadblocks and objections in the sales process. In the sales process, you aren't just competing against competitive offerings. You are also competing for buyers' attention and their resources against a vast spectrum of alternative priorities. In fact, you are also competing for mind share, the 5 whys. Competing for resources, competing against alternatives, competing against buyer roadblocks, and competing against the status quo. You also have to overcome buying group conflict, their status, implications, and their own self-interests. Buyers justify their position on a purchasing decision, any decision that requires change, by putting up roadblocks and objections. Where the buyer journey begins. Whether the buyer's journey is triggered by gain, pain, or loss avoidance, it begins somewhere, and by someone. In fact, most buyers' journeys, over 60%, are as a result of some sort of pain the business is feeling. There are 3 main types of buyer pain. Latent pain, a problem looming on the horizon, but apparently ignored, intentionally or otherwise, by the customer. Identified pain. The customer is aware of the problem, but will live with it in the absence of a satisfactory, affordable solution. Trigger pain, where the customer is aware of the problem and takes action to solve it. Obstacles are different from roadblocks. Obstacles in the sales process are mainly external, e.g. pricing, while roadblocks are internal, the behind-the-scenes, private, internal stuff you don't see. Roadblocks usually happen deeper in the sales process, usually at the presentation or closing stages. When the buyer group has formed and the more serious yes commitments need to be given. So, why do buyer roadblocks and objections happen in the sales process? Well, research shows that the buying process can be characterized as a conflict situation. You see, buyer roadblocks has many internal moving parts, including individual needs and concerns, implications and roles, communication and ownership, politics and status, plus historic relationships between members of the buying group. The implications are that buyers are looking at multiple things that they could invest in. You have to overcome the many implications that a potential customer must consider before purchasing any offering. These implications include concerns about change, risk, user training, etc. The many internal tangible and intangible factors that are associated with the actual adoption of a new offering. You also have to contend with buyer group member status and self-interest. Members of the buying group will risk as little as possible in case their status is risked, so they act cautiously. You are competing for buyer attention and resources when the buying group members may have conflicting self-interests. Well, the good news is that roadblocks and objections can be removed from the buying situation. Let's look at the buying situation. We already stated that buying is a conflict situation. Roadblocks and objections are removed if the total force buyer group agreement towards buying becomes greater than the opposing forces buyer disagreement. According to research from Stanford University, there are 4 major roadblocks to change that buyers experience. The 4 buyer roadblocks are: 1. Buyers prefer stability. 2. The anticipated regret. 3. The perceived cost of change. And 4. Selection difficulty.
First up is that buyers prefer stability. We will use words such as, "We are going to stick with our current solution for now. But we are grateful for your effort with this. Let's stay in touch."
Buyers prefer stability because change represents the disruption of the status quo in unknowable ways. So, members of the buying group defend themselves by resisting any change when feeling threatened. In the sales process, how do we know when a buyer is ready to leave their preference for stability? Well, it starts when their stable preference for the OK recognizes it cannot fix any problems with known or internal resources. And then the force towards, in the buying group dynamic, is prepared to change in a way that won't cause them irreparable disruption to the business or their reputation. To give buyers a path forward, we need to ask, how are we helping the buyers move through each stage of the buying process? Then, what stage will the buying group enter next, and how can you pave the way for that transition? The path to moving out of the status quo is the same for all buyers' journeys. It begins when they recognize something is wrong. Then, there must be a thorough understanding by the buying group of all the moving parts. For example, you can't get where you're going until you know where you're at. To destabilize the okay, it's about helping the customer create a vision of a new future and how they might get there. It's important that the customer is involved in creating the vision, it becomes part of them, rather than someone else's vision. They must own the vision. So, that brings us to the end of this quick preview lesson. You can access the full lesson, and over 80 more sales training videos and downloads, for 1 full year, with one low-cost subscription. We offer you low-cost, fun and engaging training for less than $30 for 1 full year. All subscriptions include all sales programs and associated lesson content. Plus, visit our blog for lots of free sales insights and tips.